Hello and welcome to the Election Corner on One Man Think Tank. Today I'm going to be discussing why the Politico 2020 presidential, Senate, and House election maps are garbage, or in the long form, why I hate something I call horse race politics. Now, for those of you who don't go out and search for presidential election trackers, the Politico one has gotten a little bit of infamy as of late, because it is the worst offender of what I call horse race politics, as I said before, and I can show you this by actually going through it. So we'll go through all four of the trackers they have here, starting with the presidency. They find the presidential race is too close to call. This is a fair rating. In my own presidential election predictions, I find, because I don't use raw toss-up, I find it falls heavily into the lean Democratic, lean conservative column, which is totally fine and reasonable. Donald Trump managed to pull off a surprise victory last time. He might be able to do so again, while Joe Biden has a lot of institutional support that, frankly, has been around since Barack Obama and was not too favorable to Hillary Clinton. But let's look at their actual map prediction. They have it a solid, large, across-the-board toss-up. So first they use solid, likely, lean, and toss-up as their rating system. So no tilt here. So they will be forced to put very close races into the toss-up column. That being said, as you can see, there are some expected toss-ups. Pennsylvania is a little bit surprising, but North Carolina, Florida, Arizona, and Wisconsin are not surprising at all. Then it gets a bit weird. You end up with Michigan and New Hampshire and even Nevada in the toss-up column. And they give their explanations down below, but I want to really flesh out how strange this is. Then in the leans category, you have Colorado and Virginia as lean Democratic for some reason. And then you end up with states like Delaware and Rhode Island as likely Democratic, Maine going Democratic overall, lean at best. Texas is lean GOP, along with Georgia and Ohio. Utah, apparently that's in play, and that Nebraska's second district, that's a toss-up. Because, it could be anyone who wins that state. And Oregon, a reliably blue state, you never know. I mean, part of the state's red. So let's look at their explanations, and I'll get into why this is the worst of the worst. So we'll ignore these right here. We'll start with Michigan. Okay, Trump flipped Michigan in 2016, though his 0.2 victory was the smallest margin in any state. Democrats surged back in the 2018 midterms with decisive victories. Trump will have to win back some of those Republican voters he lost in order to repeat his 2016 feat. So, this is the narrative they're going with. Aha! Trump flipped it in 2016. That guarantees that the Democrat has no chance in the state or any advantage in it, because Trump won it once by 0.2% of the vote, despite the fact the previous Democratic president won it by double digits, and they surged back in 2018, taking everything and only being unable to take the state, House, and Senate by extensive gerrymandering shenanigans. So, because one president won it at one point in time, and by a small amount. So, for example, if they put it as leans, I could at least understand that. Leans Democratic, but, Trump won it by a tiny-ass margin. You never know. So, Florida. Pennsylvania, I disagree with this one. I actually think Pennsylvania is a pretty Democratic state. Republicans finally flipped Pennsylvania in 2016. Democrats feel confident they can snatch it back in 2020, but it could be a state where the party of choice of its nominee and his or her political policy position, so this was also made back before it was a little bit clearer Joe Biden would win, will make the difference. So this ignores two key facts here, and we'll get the most egregious one of these little bars right here in a moment. So Obama wins by 10 points in 2018. But in 2012, he only wins by 5 points. Oh, in 2016, Trump won by 1 point, which only means, following this trend, Trump's going to win by 6 points in 2020. Even though that doesn't make any sense when you analyze it. Barack Obama was an incumbent coming in on a strong blue wave in 2018, and in 2012, he was much more battered. He had to deal with a full Tea Party movement. And, frankly, if an incumbent president gains support, the last one to do it had 9/11 happen to him, and I don't think he actually gained percentages in the midterms. I don't think his support grew in the states he won. But, like, Reagan did better in I believe, his second election, but every other president hasn't done as well. But, as you can see, these bars are trying to present a clear and obvious narrative why these are toss-ups. Democratic, weaker Democratic, Republican barely wins, so clearly by this logic, it's going more Republican, so the Democrats have to work a lot harder to win the state, despite, like, Wisconsin. So there's no tilt here. I'll give them Wisconsin. I understand that. Wisconsin's genuinely been going more red, but there was a resurgence of blue voters. So toss-up makes sense for Wisconsin, not necessarily for Michigan. And the most egregious one that summarizes what I'm talking about here before I go into details is Nebraska's 2nd District. Democrats called the 2nd District Obamaha after the Illinoisians swiped an electoral victory there in 2008. Mitt Romney took it back by a 7-point margin in 2012, but it was again close in 2016. Trump won it by a little more than 2 points. That does not make this a toss-up. And it goes again, and the reason you don't see the 2018 box for Obamaha here is a really simple thing. It contradicts the general simplistic narrative that's allowing them to peddle this. And I'll get to why they're peddling this in a moment. Because it would contradict it. So it has blue winning, then red winning, and then red going down. But that doesn't match with the rest of these. That indicates a horse race. And that's where we get to why I hate toss-up as a use unless it is literally impossible to tell. But in every race, you can usually make a fraction of a percentage guess of who wins 51% of the time. Toss-ups are a way to cover your ass in So toss-ups originally are a way for pollsters and predictors to cover their ass in the case of a tight race. It lets them go in and say, well, we can't be sure one way or another, so that way if we can't get it wrong if we don't say one. All we're saying is someone's going to win and it'll be close, which in my opinion is a little bit of a dishonest way to look at and a kind of a cop-out, but it's evolved into something much, much worse, in my opinion, and that is the horse race, because politics has always been a horse race. Who's going to win? Who's going to take what states? Oh, it's so exciting, which, let's face it, I like the idea of that horse racy bit of politics, and if you're watching this channel, you probably like it. Or at least this video. But there's a difference between going, oh, I wonder who's going to win. Let's look, let's analyze, let's talk about it. Here's where X can make up to get an overhead on Y, which is what polling and predictions are initially for, so people can get an idea of where the race is at and if someone can beat the other person, and then where they can make up for their weakness. This is to create spectacle. This is to make it seem like it's this wild race coming out of nowhere. All of these states are in play. Oh, you need to watch for our coverage of Nevada and Arizona and North Carolina and Pennsylvania and Michigan because you never know what's going to happen. Even though saying a state like Nevada is a toss-up is incredibly dishonest. Just by looking at political trends going back for an incredibly long time, if a president loses a state in their first run, they're very unlikely to pick it up in their second. Especially, like, Nevada. There was a notice, it's not like Nevada squeaked out to Hillary Clinton. There were a couple points difference there. And so you end up with states like Pennsylvania, and Florida is everyone's favorite one for this, but at least it's close to being toss-up. But then you get states like Virginia and Colorado, which have shown very recently, in the case of Virginia in the 2019 election, that it's, okay, we're in the Democratic side of things right now. It might be close at the, like, individual district level, because I think it's 51 in the Virginia State House to 49. Maybe that's the Senate, I can't remember which one. But I think it's 100 for the House, 40 for the Senate. Yeah. And you get in this narrative of, oh, Virginia, it's so exciting! Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! Who knows how it's gonna go? It's to hype up this non-existent horse race rather than providing actual political analysis. To give you this 112-point toss-up gap. Is there really a world, and I'm being completely honest here, where, let's say, if Joe Biden loses New Hampshire, where Delaware would still even be in any way, shape, or form in play, and Delaware's going to be the big one in the Senate when we get to that in a moment. But the presidential election is the most obvious one because there are states here which aren't toss-ups or even likely, like Utah. But then you get to the Senate. And that's where we get really annoying, because I like to focus on the Senate personally. I think it's a much more interesting race with a lot more interesting dynamics. But here we go. We think the Republicans remain favorites to hold the 2020 Senate. So they're expecting Republicans to get 50%, 50 seats, and Democrats to get 46 seats, and then you got 4 in the middle. Not an unreasonable prediction at its face. So let's look at the toss-ups and why Republicans have so much likely in their ledger, because clearly it's going to be focused on the South. Okay, Maine, I get that being a toss-up. North Carolina, I see that. Arizona, yeah, makes sense. The polling's been going more in favor of the Democrat. Oh, Colorado, it's a toss-up? Why? I know back when this was made, Colorado was, in every poll, you had Democrats leading the Republican by a solid chunk. So, surely it's at least lean Dem. What's their logic? Cory Gardner is the Republicans' most vulnerable Senate incumbent and faces headwinds at the top of the ticket in a blue-leaning state. The Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee endorsed former Governor John Hickenlooper, who still faces competitors in the primary. So Hickenlooper was in at this point. That's not an explanation. That's saying what the race is. That doesn't explain why it's a toss-up. It's literally saying, well, if a Republican incumbent were to lose to a Democrat, I mean, he's still got a fair fighting chance. And I'm not just going to even try and portray this like it's the Democrats who have the thing. It's just bias against Democrats. Nope, Alabama. I mean, Doug Jones, he's still got a solid chance to win there, despite all the polling saying no, he doesn't. The 2 Georgia races end up being both lean GOP, which, honestly, I kind of disagree with, especially if the opponent wins in the special election. North Carolina, I kind of get the toss-up argument, but fine. Delaware. We'll talk about Delaware. Delaware shouldn't be likely Democratic. They're doing this so they can have their little bar at the top be with as many races that could possibly flip as possible. So that way that when they report on the Delaware race, or they get to make a call at a later point to make Delaware more competitive, it's, oh, so interesting. But in reality, Delaware is... So you want to know the 2 potential... So when this was made, there wasn't even a candidate in the Republican primary, I'm pretty sure. I might be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure there wasn't a candidate in the Delaware primary for the Republicans. But in the lean GOP, but on now, there is you have Democratic incumbent, Chris Coons, and his opponents are, I double-checked this before I made the video, a Republican, the guy who ran in 2016 and got curb stomped, and the guy and a woman who is a conservative activist, which is the same thing as running a businessman in Wyoming, which is what the Democrats always do, or a Democratic activist in Idaho. No issue with those states, but Delaware could be up. And what is their logic to justify this change? Let's view all races. Go down to the D. Democratic Senator Chris Coons has angered some on the left with a bipartisan voting record that includes supporting confirmation for a number of Trump nominees. So what, they're going to vote for the Republican over him? There's going to be a contested primary? This does not justify a likely Democratic rating. And the reason they did this, like I said, is for the spectacle of a wide-ranging horse race. It encourages people to take, and this is what bothers me, it encourages people to take incredibly simplistic views on deeply complex political topics. So it says, like in the presidential one, well, it started off very blue, but now it's closer, and it's even closer after that. Despite the fact that it's missing some very obvious, bigger trends that indicate these states are a lot more interesting and, in this case, more democratic for the toss-up states. But in the Senate, it's just all over the place. Tennessee, it's likely GOP. Why is Tennessee likely GOP? Because the senator is retiring. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't instantly make a seat competitive. What about one of my favorites to harp on how close it is, Kansas? That's also likely GOP. Unlike Texas, which is lean alongside Alabama. Despite the fact that Alabama's 2017 Senate race was literally considered a miracle for the Democrats and kind of a forewarning of what 2018 would look like, apparently just being incumbent is amazing. So it literally is taking three things and working with it. One, assuming incumbents have some kind of magical power, and if there's no incumbent, it puts weakness on the entire race. Two, that people who are upset with the current candidate but voted for them last time will defect to the other side unless you're talking like the deepest suburban districts. And three, and vastly more importantly, that all of these races are somehow up in the air. Like, if you had to ask me to come up with a scenario in which the Republicans win Delaware, I could come up with it. But I wouldn't in any way say, because I could come up with that scenario, Delaware is likely Democratic. I would just say Delaware is safe, but if Republicans do X, Y, and Z, they can move it to likely. It's like, or New Hampshire. I get New Hampshire at this point, when they made this, but at this point in time, it's not safe anymore. But I literally said, the way Republicans could make New Hampshire interesting, run Chris Sununu, their current governor. He could win. And all of a sudden, New Hampshire goes to leans Democratic. Or even in my book, I may put a tilt. He is that potent in that state. For some reason. I have no idea why. Or Montana. I said it when I had it at safe. You want to change Montana? Put Steve Bullock in. All of a sudden, that's going to change up. And let me check, because I don't know how often they update these things is the other issue. Because, like, in Montana, it says, it mentions Steve Bullock entering the race, but in some of these other ones, they haven't updated for new information, like the presidency. A lot of those states are still acting like we don't know who the Democratic nominee is going to be. Or Arizona, like we haven't gotten amazing polls out of Arizona and Colorado for the Democrats, or in Tennessee, Mississippi, and even Texas, great polls for the Republicans. It's a horse-racy mess. It encourages simplistic thinking. But to round it off, I'll also show another example of what this does. So you kind of see it here, where the Republicans get 50 seats, that's half, but they don't get over 51%, but you can kind of justify it if you look at mine. And the presidency, like I said, way too many toss-ups to be comfortable with. But if you look at the House, that's where you see the most egregious example, where the Democrats, I believe, are literally one seat. They are literally one seat away from having the majority. In order to keep it so they can make it look like this is going to be this intense battle match, I don't think I've seen anyone who's been willing to put, like, if they expand the definition of their toss-up, then you get a little bit more. But I've seen plenty of people are willing to go, okay, Democrats, the lean Democrat goes over the majority line. They're likely to remain the owners of the House. Nope, one seat away. Why? Because using their logic of incumbent is power, that weird trajectory where they assume everything's getting more conservative and all that jazz, it's one seat away. Why? Because otherwise they have to say that, the House is probably going to be won by the Democrats, and that's not a horse race, that's analysis. As for the governors, there's one big one I have to just point out, and they are Vermont and North Carolina. They are toss-up. Why? Simplistic logic strikes again. Or even, I'll get to their little screw-up on West Virginia in a moment. But Vermont's historically a blue state. And I'm not even lying, this is literally their logic. All races, where's Vermont? Vermont. I mean, he won by 55% of the vote in 2018, a great year for the Democrats, and the state votes very blue. So naturally, this is a toss-up, because who has any idea? It's not like he's got wild support and has charted a moderate course in a blue state. They're making it sound like Republicans are going to come out of the woodwork to shoot him down. No, Republicans love the fact the Republican governor is in charge, even if he's a progressive one. It's like or he's not a progressive, a centrist one. It's like how, if you ask a New York Democrat, a progressive, they hate Chris Cuomo. Yeah, he's the president. He's the gubernatorial one. I'll just say Governor Cuomo. They hate him. But they'll take him over any Republican that runs for the seat any day. That's the same logic here, but simplistic thinking says no. North Carolina, toss up. Not even leans Democratic, because that has to be restricted to the New Hampshire governor race, where Chris Sununu improved in a blue midterm. Because why put leans for the North Carolina governor race when he's polling well, and frankly, yeah, I know it's close, but that was his first time, and it looks like he's going to do better the second time because he doesn't have a good opponent. But no one, they don't care about that. They want a toss-up because, as you can see, it's barely going over the line, and that's putting states like West Virginia and Missouri in the lean GOP category without really considering the actual polling on the matter. And also because the governors are never going to be interesting as long as Maryland, Vermont, and New Hampshire, and Massachusetts keep electing Republican governors. Because they elect moderate Republicans who are essentially, like, if you actually compared the policies of Governor Baker of Massachusetts and the governor of Kansas, they look basically the same as opposed to the governor of Massachusetts and the governor of, let's say, South Dakota, who are wildly different, and you wouldn't be mistaken for assuming Baker's actually a Democrat. You have a few northeastern Republicans who are sticking around and will be gone once the term limit's up. Then it's going to be Democrats are barely holding on to the gubernatorial majorities for the next decade or so. But one brief thing, we think 2 states could flip and elect Republicans. West Virginia already has a Republican, and they say it down below, too. The incumbent, Jim Justice, switched parties immediately after taking office. And there's a chance there'll be a flip for the Democrat, but honestly, he's not that unpopular, and he made the move specifically to kind of remain in office, honestly. So, I think there's a solid chance he's going to remain in office. But I hate how they're, because they want it to be like, oh, we think 2 states could flip. Montana, that's an actual flip. Well, West Virginia's been under Republican leadership. It's dishonest to say it's not. So, that's my opinion on horse race politics. It sucks. It encourages people to oversimplify their logic and encourage, frankly, disinformation on races in order to make them look tighter. Now, if you agree with me or disagree with me, leave a comment stating so down below. Helps me gauge what people think about my opinions and can sometimes allow me to reevaluate. If you like the video, please leave a like down below. And if you wish to see more from this channel, click the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can be alerted when new content comes out. And, as always, have a wonderful day.